Hello, this is Dr. James Rivera, and today we're going to look at Stefanie Talley's Considering the Body from a Cross-Cultural Perspective. This essay, fairly short, will also give you ideas about what you can look for when you're reading world literature texts. Now, she begins by saying that three questions guide sociological and anthropological study of the body across cultures. What are some of the major differences across cultures and how the body is perceived? And then what cultural norms are involved in these differences and how can these differences affect cross-cultural interactions? And then how can we move toward a cross-cultural approach to understanding the body? These are almost exactly the questions that we're trying to find some answers to in our study of literature this semester. And you might also want to note that when Talley is talking about the background literature on this topic, she does make reference to some of the French philosophers associated with Julia Kristeva and the Tel Quel movement, and some of her predecessors as well. So there's a continuity of approach here that you should be able to see between Kristeva's article and maybe some of the ideas in this one. Now, the bulk of Talley's essay is to consider four different questions that researchers tend to focus on, or four different areas of inquiry that researchers tend to focus on when they're discussing these questions. The first involves definitions of the body. And you can look back to the Cura myth and see that as a way of asking, what is the body? And by extension, what is a human being? Now, when Talley goes into detail about this topic, she explains that cultures tend to fall into either individual or social understandings of the body. So, in an individual understanding of the body is seen as part of one's individual person and is distinct from the person's environment and from society. That's a very Western notion. Um, some Eastern notions and some notions in other areas of the world tend to emphasize social understandings of the body. So, in all of these sub areas, subtopics of Talley's essay, she provides a number of concrete examples, which I'm not going to discuss. But again, you should be reading the essay before you're watching the video, and then have the essay up next to you while you watch the video. That's my recommendation. Um, so, without going into a lot of the specific examples, she does mention that some cultures see the body as continuous with its external environment, like there isn't a difference between the physical body and the external world. And she also explains that some cultures have a structural or relational view of personhood, in which personhood is defined by one's roles and responsibilities. Now, that's not completely foreign to the West either. We might want to think that in many cases, these different conceptions of the body build on one another over the course of our lives. And that takes us to the next topic in Talley's essay, which is the body across different life stages. And most cultures tend to define these life stages as birth, childhood, adulthood, and death. And almost all cultures have rituals associated with different life stages. It's like one thing that almost all of us have in common. And different conceptions of time also affect how we view different life stages. You know, not every culture thinks in terms of clock time, but almost every culture thinks in terms of life stage. Um, the next area of inquiry is the body in action. And this area of study includes how we go about and perceive our daily routines. I mean, real basic stuff like eating or going to the bathroom, or, washing, anything like that. And there are, as you know, as you should know, there are cultural norms guiding all of this. They're not just natural. Different cultures view the activities differently and ascribe different meanings to them, besides just doing them differently. And this um, affects even things like position of childbirth. She provided statistics for cross-cultural studies of positions in childbirth. In most cultures in the world, the woman is kneeling when she gives birth. And then after that, squatting is more common. Um, So here in the United States, if that's where you are when you're taking this course, it's more common for a woman to be laying on her back or maybe somewhat reclined and to be attended to by nurses and doctors as opposed to older women, midwives in other cultures. And I'd also like you to observe how binary opposites are observed in this area of study, the body in action. And the one that she talks about is left versus right handedness. Now, right handedness is most common across world cultures, apparently, according to her sources. But notice how that becomes associated with different cultural values, and it's even reflected in our language, like being in the right or seated at the right hand of God. And that associates the right with moral superiority. And then that can in turn reflect back on people who are left handed. So you have a bodily statistical norm which influences the way we speak and think, which in turn reflects back on how we view the body. Um, so that's some of the kinds of things you can observe going on in world literature texts. And the study of dress and physical appearance also affects how we understand the body. Finally, the regulation of the body. Um, uh, how we perceive and rank our own physical senses is an object of study in this area. Most cultures privilege some or one physical sense over the other, but they don't all privilege, say, sight like we tend to. For some, it's smell or hearing. And how we experience, interpret, and react to physical pain is also in part subject to cultural differences. And you may see this in our reading in this course. Differing conceptions of health and sickness, which is this particular unit, are also studied in this area. And you know, you could see that reflected in the way people talk about the ideal person, the ideal physical body, the newly created person who's supposed to be a perfect example of humankind, you know, at its apex or at its perfection before any kind of a fall or degeneration of some kind. And it also has to do with conceptions of sickness, and then as an extension of that, how we understand, express, and experience or process different emotions are also subject to cultural differences. And that's something you're definitely going to see reflected in the literature that you read this semester. So look for that. Look for how people respond to grief, how people respond to childbirth when it's mentioned, how people react to a newly created person, how they view that person. And then, of course, manners and cultural taboos also have to do with the regulation of the body. So overall, I'd like you to read Talley's article first for the content about everything that's involved in different ways of studying the body, but second, as providing questions and areas of inquiry that you can bring to your own reading of literature in this course this semester. Thank you.